I've got to do is a quick plug about the youth vote generally too. My very, very first campaign was the New Voters Project, which is now Rock the Vote. And what I love about this campaign, and what the polls don't really represent, they don't have cell phone numbers generally. They don't call cell phone numbers. And think about everyone you know who has a landline, who's like in your generation. I mean, I haven't had a landline since I lived with my parents, right? So like, and I'm quite a bit older than you guys. So we're the wild card. You know, you look at Washington, and if we just flipped less than 20,000 votes, we would have won in Washington. We could get 20,000 young people, new voters, to like vote. I mean, that could be it. The youth vote alone could win this. I mean, we're going to obviously organize everyone everywhere to get out every vote we possibly can. But I'm particularly excited about the fact that we have organizers at every major university in this state focusing on this issue, because it's crucial to this issue, but it's also crucial, I think, to just our democracy, getting young people engaged in politics and feeling that power. Like, I know if I had been, I mean, my first few times voting, I felt very defeated. But like, if the first time you vote, you actually win on GMO labeling in the state that you're voting, that's going to get people civically engaged and inspired to continue to vote for the rest of their lives. I mean, if you know, I know that I'm here to represent the SN92, but I mean, Food and Water Watch has, you know, and we all have this commitment to really transitioning our electorate so that, you know, it represents young people and so it represents the American citizens better. So like, I think that, keep that in mind as well. Getting young people to vote, especially in this election, is going to be super empowering. And it's going to make them voters for life. And so this is huge. I'm sure you're here because you care and you plan on voting, but this will be a massive election and a really incredible opportunity to get people inspired to vote and to really feel that it matters and makes a difference. It's a huge election. But
should we do questions?
Q&A, yeah.
So how could this measure pertain to, say, like a student that doesn't go grocery shopping and maybe just eats at the cafeteria, or maybe younger voters that aren't really concerned about shopping at grocery stores yet?
I think it's all about thinking of yourself as a citizen, thinking of yourself as someone who inevitably you're going to be graduating, you're going to be on your own, you're going to be making these kinds of choices. And so I think we would be asking students, as you're considering where you're going to vote on this measure, think of yourself as a grown-up and what you're ultimately going to be when you graduate, and what kind of world do you want to live in, and what kind of information do you want to have.
And I remember in college, I had a lot of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. There was a lot of snacking going on, and like, those foods are going to have labels on them, you know what I mean? And you can make the decision about what kind of food. That's still, you're still going to see the label and it's still going to make you think. So I mean, everyone eats food, and so I think I agree with your answer for sure, but it's like students still buy you know, the food that comes in packages. It's going to have an impact on everyone.
So I just kind of want to, it's more of a comment, and I want to know what you guys think. So, like comparing Washington and California, and you said there was other states who are doing it with Yes 92. How much do you feel like the environment affects the vote? Because, like, say we were trying to do this in maybe Houston, Texas, or Texas, where a lot of it's fast food. You know, it's one of the heaviest cities in the world. You know, where a lot of it's just a lot of people are very, you know, naive about what they're eating, and nutrition's not really like that measure probably wouldn't pass in some place like that. But do you guys feel like because we're in Oregon and because a lot of people are green and, you know, they have the most Priuses like in the world in Lake County, in Eugene, you know, so it's like, you know, really green here, do you feel like that's going to impact it?
National polling that's been done now for the last decade shows pretty consistently that over 90% of Americans support knowing whether their food is genetically engineered, and that cuts across the political spectrum, cuts across geographical lines. Has been a consistent thing. So I wouldn't take it as a foregone conclusion that if this were up on if the Texas had an initiative process and this were up on the ballot in Texas, that voters might not look at it the same way as they do here in Oregon. The right to know what's in your food is a fairly universal value that, you know, has very little to do with the environment or this, that, or the other. That there are environmental concerns is significant, and maybe that will weigh in Oregonians' minds. But I see no evidence that the issue really is any different in any one place. What we do know is that the opposition has a lot of resources to be able to plant seeds of doubt in people's minds, and then that's where we struggle. But I think that's the same everywhere.
Okay.
So I think it's a distinction without a difference, quite frankly.
I mean, I'll chime in and say that, you know, a lot of people believe because, you know, we're a progressive blue state or whatever, that our chances are, you know, better. And maybe that's the reason why there's been these on the West Coast or, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, GMOs and this topic of GMOs is totally a nonpartisan thing. You know, I mean, Jackson County, Josephine County was just this May passed a ban growing and cultivation of GMOs in their county, so Ashland, Medford area. You know, those are two incredibly Republican-centric counties. And, you know, not just labeling, they're going to ban them. So, you know, at the same time, you know, Colorado is a rather, you know, red state in terms of the bulk of it, you know, and they're looking at GMO labeling. Arizona's been trying to do it. Arizona is a very red-leaning state. So it has really nothing to do with, you know, being progressive and whatever. You know, it's just like across.
It's not a liberal conservative, this is a public interest, a special interest issue. That's the axis by which it plays on. And it's a question of special interests being able to use their power and their money to distort the facts such that then the debate gets skewed. And that's really what it is. But it starts out as a complete public interest, you know, consensus issue, you know, before the opposition pollutes it with their, you know, misinformation.
And the way the opposition does it is pretty genius. It's exhausting for them, but they have inexhaustible resources. But what they do is they never take on the idea about whether or not you have a right to know. They never compete on that. They're like, and often they'll say, you know, this doesn't go far enough. It doesn't label the feed for animals. It doesn't do all these other things. It should, you know, and the opposition confuses, or their goal is to confuse voters about the specific ballot initiative. Mm-hmm. They take on the language of the ballot initiative. They make up things about the ballot initiative, how it was written, the way it'll be implemented. They invent things about how it'll impact, you know, farmers and the market. I mean, when they say it's going to make the cost of groceries go up $500 per person, they'll say that, and they're going to claim it's a Cornell study. It's a study that they paid for, and Cornell actually does not put their name on that study. It is an industry study that paid Cornell scientists to do it, but like it's an industry study. Their assumption that they used when they said that your price of your food is going to go up $500 a year was that the day that we pass GMO labeling, that all food manufacturers are going to instantly have to shift toward making everything with organic ingredients. Immediately. They're going to pull things off the shelf and like transition to all organic immediately, which is a preposterous assumption. And also, it's not something that is mandated by the law. If that were even to be a response of the market, which is preposterous, it's not mandated by the law that they do that. But that's how they get that $500 mark. And that's just, I mean, that's ludicrous. But they're not going to say that. They're just going to say your price of your groceries is going up $500. And that's scary to people, right? So they still believe they have a right to know what's in their food. They just don't want to pay $500 more a year in groceries, which they won't be doing anyway. But that's how the opposition, like, convinces, you know, 90%. That's how they would go about telling people in Texas, like, this isn't in your best interest, even though the right to know crosses every single political spectrum.
It's like false research. I mean.
Yeah, false assertions, exactly. That tug at people's, you know, either heartstrings or wallet. Yeah.
And just to further the disinformation aspect of that, as not to deviate further, but it's actually $400 that they claim, but the asterisk at the bottom is that it's $400 for a family of four per year. So it's really only $100 per person per year, but they don't say that, even though those are the kind of numbers that we're using. It's $400 asterisk for a household of four. Right, you know.
Which is still 50 times more than what it actually would be according to Consumer Reports, who actually did a study on some integrity.
Right.
Yeah, actually, yeah, exactly.
Just keep moving through questions.
Yeah, questions, sorry.
Considering that by definition 100% organic and USDA certified organic means there's no GMOs, what's the point of this labeling initiative when we already know if something has GMOs or not?
I don't know this question.
Yeah. Do you?
Sorry. So organic represents a total of 8% of the market.
Okay.
So organic and non-GMO project, they're 8% of the market. 92% of grocery shopping world can't afford to do that. So does that 92% of the population not deserve the information? Right, so organic is an exclusive club, is really what it amounts to. There is as much as I want the whole world to transition to organic, because I believe in that, it's not something that is attainable on the regular day-to-day grocery shopping for 90% of the country.
Yeah, but it's not as easy as just slapping a sticker on something and saying that it has GMOs in it. I mean, we're talking about cleaving the food distribution supply. We're talking about they're going to have to grow it in separate fields, they're gonna need to pick it separately, they're gonna need to store it separately, ship it separately.
And this is actually how they
Process
already,
it separately.
and this is how they already do it. I mean, these things are already grown. I mean, farmers know if they're growing GMOs and they grow them. That's something that already happens. They're already
Nothing will
segmented.
change. U.S. food companies already tell citizens in 64 countries around the world whether or not their food is genetically engineered. They've been doing that for over a decade, and there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that of those things that you're describing happening. There's no evidence of food prices going up, none of that stuff. So this
Because
is
they've never had those systems before. They've only ever had non-GMO.
No, that's
They
not
haven't
true.
had to do it.
That's not true.
Well,
If you go-
because American
if you go-
companies sell GMO foods in France.
If you go
and
to,
they
if
have
you
a
go to
link.
those countries,
But they don't grow them over there.
They do, and they grow it here. And if you go, so it's two things. If you go to any of these countries, you will see food on the shelf that in fact is genetically engineered and it has a label on it. So it's a wash to say, it's not true to say that you go to those countries and they don't have GMOs in their food. There are GMOs in their food and people buy it, but they're informed about it. That's number one. Number two, we talked about this the other day when we were with Consumer Reports, is, I'm going to say it again, is that U.S. companies already tell consumers in 64 countries whether or not the food that the U.S. companies are producing and growing here are genetically engineered. So a cereal, Kix, they sell Kix, they make Kix here in the United States, and if it's on the shelf here, and it turns out Consumer Reports found they did DNA testing of Kix, and it does contain genetically engineered ingredients. That's not a surprise, but they can confirm that. If you buy Kix here, it doesn't have a label on it. If you buy Kix in those 64 countries, it does have a label on it. Same product, same country of origin. The only difference is there's a label. It's just, that's a fact. It's just 64 countries over a decade. And so it's, for us, I think we would rather take a look at what is the established experience of a third of the world's population over the last decade than hypotheticals that, may or may not come to pass, but there's no evidence that they come to pass. Speculation versus real experience.
But I mean, the last time that back in 2002, and this was also on the ballot, they actually had real numbers compared to the voter pamphlet, where it says there are potential indirect and economic effects that may be offsetting, therefore the direct financial impact and indirect economic impact is indeterminate.
This is what
So
I'm
you
saying
guys
is-
don't know though. You don't know if it's going to cost people or not at this point.
What I'm saying is that a third of the world's population, 64 countries, United States food companies already tell them, and there's no evidence that any of the sky is falling scenarios that have been reported by the opponents of GMO labeling, has come to pass. And in life, in general, when we have ample actual experience of something playing out, that trumps hypotheticals that can be concocted by anybody. And so what we're saying here is that we have ample now planetary experience, global experience with labeling GMOs to show that this is something that not only does it make sense, but none of the negative scenarios that have been concocted have come to pass.
Well, and it was also said that when we fought to get nutritional labeling, just basic nutritional and ingredient labeling in the U.S., because that's not something that has always existed, the industry said, oh my gosh, this is going to cause the food prices to go up. This is going to be something really hard for food manufacturers to do. And it's going to be really expensive. It's going to just destroy our profit margins. This is going to be a disaster for the consumers. And we got nutritional food labeling, and prices did not change. The sky did not fall. Every time we push for any kind of labeling or informational label, the same responses come from the industry about how this is going to cause the cost of food to go up, and those things never came to pass on those labels either. So that's another, I think, example of labeling not increasing costs. It's happened
I'll chime
repeatedly.
in just one more. I think one of the points you were trying to make was that many of the countries that we're referring to don't have substantial agricultural growth already in place of GMOs at the point of enacting labeling.
Exactly.
Was that what?
Yes.
So a corollary to that is to looking more at China. China is currently I believe it's the number 2 or 3 producer of GMOs behind the United States. They have GMO labeling in that country, and yet they still produce. They're still the number 2 or 3 producer of it. So, that supply chain has already been there. There hasn't been an astronomical raise in the cost of their prices in China. So if you want to look for that corollary, look more with China as an
I don't think we should be comparing ourselves to China by any means.
Why not?
Yeah, why
Yeah,
not?
so why not?
Because we have totally different economies.
they're people, right? I
I think we
mean,
fleshed out that particular.
Right.
they eat food, don't they?
It's just like price raise,
Right.
the raising of
Right.
prices, I mean, they can have a different economy, but if it doesn't affect their economy, then it wouldn't affect ours.
Right.
I think that's a very broad assumption to make, based on two totally different countries, cultures, everything.
Like if in the US they say, oh, like you were saying how it's not determined whether it's gonna affect our economy, and then they in France or abroad have been doing it for 10 years, like, and that kind of shows that it hasn't been affecting them, like would it like affect us too? I mean, that's the evidence that, I mean, I don't know if I'm just saying this right, but like they're saying, oh, like it's hypothetical in the US, but if we have evidence of it being in other places, then like
The
would
evidence
it?
is very, 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 very strong. Nothing is ever a guarantee in life. Of course, tomorrow we could do something and, I mean, we know that, right? So it's just a question of what's reasonable and common sense and the general framework we use to make decisions about anything in life. And there are very few things where there is so much experience that is very, 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 very comparable to what we're proposing here, that show that the negative, where the negative impacts didn't come to pass. And so I think, we say that and most people that are looking at this issue go, that is ample. If you were making any other kind of decision, policy decision, you'd go, that's a path that has been beaten, is the beaten path. And you can be very, very confident that we are not doing anything different than what the beaten path is. So you can disagree, but there you have it. That's how that debate shakes out. So maybe we should move on to another question.
Yeah.
I got a question. So there's 3 different types of food groups, right? Basically, we got organic, which is labeled by the FDA since 1990. We have GMO food, and then we also have conventional food. Now, I don't believe I've ever seen any labels stating that anything's conventional as opposed to GMO. So there's got to be, I mean, like, do you guys, any of you know what I think the United States has like 44% GMO crops being grown here. Do you have any idea? And 8% on the organic, so the other half of it's got to be certified or conventional, right? So, yeah, I guess, my question is like, is there really like a difference between like, if you know something's certified organic because it says so, the other stuff is just all GMO, or is there a difference there between GMO products and like other things that aren't particularly labeled in that?
Well, that's where we live in right now, because we don't know. Like
Right.
you just described exactly what every consumer going to the store experience. I see this conventional stuff, and I'm wondering if it's GMO, and we don't know. And so what the label does is it basically breaks down that conventional area to conventional, which means it's not organic, so it's probably grown with some chemicals and things. And then you've got GMO, which was definitely grown with some chemicals and is genetically modified. Well, that's not true. Someday we might have GMOs that are genetically modified for some other reasons, but right now in the market, that's how they are. So if that's why this labeling initiative is happening, is so that people can know within the conventional area of the market, which is most of it, which of those are genetically modified. And that's exactly the kind of clarity we're seeking in the food labeling. Does that answer your question? Is that what you were trying to get at?
Yeah, I mean, because I think a lot of people I've seen a lot of things where people are very much against GMOs online and things like that in forums and whatnot, but they don't seem to understand that there's only about 5 crops that are actually genetically modified. Sugar beets, corn, things like that, or whatever. It's 5. Not like everything is GMO, and people don't seem to realize that if it's not certified organic, then it has to be GMO. That's not the case.
I think the challenge is that manufactured foods tend to be made with some derivative of GMO corn or soy. I mean, you look at your ingredients label, and corn and soy are in almost all manufactured food, and so that's where when people make that claim that the majority of the food in our supermarkets is genetically modified, they're talking about manufactured food.
Right.
But we don't really know what the actual percentage is because we don't have labels. So yeah.